What's up, guys? My name is Dustin Lang. I'm the online pastor here at New Story Church. I want to welcome you to our YouTube channel. Here we'll be posting content that inspires you, that challenges you, and most importantly, leads you closer to Jesus. Hope you enjoy.
It's been called the Red Box, a mysterious country infamous for its nuclear weapons and dictators. It looks hopeless and unchanging, a ruthless regime ruling through fear and oppression, unlike any other place on the planet. But that North Korea isn't the whole story anymore. And that's because of the North Korean people. They're shaking up the status quo and challenging the regime's control. They know that liberty will not be given, it must be won. And so do we. We're a global movement working with the North Korean people. This movement isn't about high-sounding words. It's about action and momentum. It's about seeing the North Korean people achieve their liberty. Because every refugee we rescue, every North Korean empowered to speak up, and every person who demands freedom for the people means liberty is no longer impossible. It is inevitable. And together, we're one step closer to the day when every man, woman, and child in North Korea is free. Welcome to the movement.
It was 11:30 p.m., and it was the third time that week that I had to stay late to redo a plan for my client. I remember staring at the spreadsheet and thinking to myself, I don't even like mayonnaise. At the time, I was 25, a manager at an ad agency creating digital media campaigns for clients like Hellmann's Mayonnaise, Dove shampoo, Axe body spray, and other CPG brands. And the funny thing is, I really liked my job. But in that moment, I sat there wondering if this was supposed to be where I was supposed to be spending the prime years of my life. I'm a planner. I like to have things planned out and prepared. From a young age, I typically had a plan, no matter how ridiculous it was. Like the time I decided to run away. I carefully packed my backpack. I figured out what time I was going to leave, how long I was going to hide under the tree in my neighbor's yard, and what time I was going to go home. As I got older, my plans became a lot more focused on my future, where I wanted to go to school, what I wanted to study, and who I wanted to be. I spent the first 20 years of my life learning how to be self-reliant, how to trust myself. And of course, in all of that, I was also the master of self-sabotage. Oftentimes, I was my own worst enemy. Throughout high school and college, I struggled with issues around my identity, self-worth, depression, and I relied on various unhealthy vices to cope. I hit rock bottom my junior year of college, ultimately reaching a point where I felt so hopeless and lost that in the times when I thought about losing my own life, they provided a brief moment of respite. But God, whom I had yet to know at that time, had other plans for me. He had been surrounding me with people who refused to give up on me even after I had given up on myself. And these were the people who would eventually lead me to him. My last 2 years of college and my first 2 years as a believer would prove to be a fight. I was constantly wrestling with God, trying to understand things like grace and redemption over things like guilt and shame, where my plans and desires would fit or contradict his. And I struggled to learn how to let go. Eventually, I realized that no matter what plans I had, and whatever plans I would make, and no matter how much I thought I was in control, it was always his steps that would take me to where I was meant to be, no matter how uncertain or how lost I felt. Throughout those 2 years, I am so grateful that I had a community that was being led by Pastor Tom and Erica, who were there and were committed to teaching me and loving me, to holding me accountable, and sometimes just simply holding me in some of my darkest moments. Those were formative years that saved me, and they prepared me for what was to come. Right after I graduated from college, I decided to go to Nicaragua for a month to work with a missionary that was there. A few days before I left, I picked up a book about North Korea, one of my first encounters with the issue, and I was reading it on the plane. It was one of the most disturbing books I have ever read in my life. It was a memoir of a young boy whose grandfather had been falsely accused of betraying the North Korean regime. And as a result, because of North Korea's collective punishment system, where up to 3 generations of your family can be punished for one person's crime, this young man was arrested at the age of 9, and with his parents and his grandmother, they were put in Yodok, one of North Korea's most brutal political prison camps. These camps are reminiscent of the Soviet gulags, Nazi concentration camps. The conditions are horrific. Things like rape, forced abortion, torture, execution, starvation, and forced labor are common. The book documented in cruel detail how this young boy spent 10 years of his life in that camp, starting at the age of 9, eventually making it out and eventually escaping to South Korea by himself in the early 90s. As I read that book, I kept wondering how they would end up shutting down these camps, only to reach the end and realize that they never do. It's believed that his sister and her 11-year-old son are still in that camp. And today, a network of these political prison camps still exist throughout North Korea, housing over 100,000 North Korean citizens, some of whom have even been born into the political prison camp system. These camps serve as an effective way for the North Korean government to promote fear and repression and to maintain absolute control over 25 million people. As our flight began to descend into Nicaragua, my heart was so heavy, and I was overwhelmed not only with sadness, but with the feeling that I hated the most: helplessness. Out of desperation, I did the only thing that I could in that moment. I closed my eyes and I whispered, "If there's anything I can do, please use me, God." And as I opened my eyes, I felt foolish and frankly embarrassed for my seemingly trite prayer. 2 years later, I was on my first trip to the border of North Korea and China. After returning from missions in Nicaragua, a good friend told me about a new group that had just been started by a group of college students. They were raising awareness about the North Korean human rights and refugee crisis. God was already at work. I jumped at the opportunity to get involved, starting by handing out flyers at a benefit concert, helping to organize small events. Whatever the organization needed, I was available. I spent my weekends and all of my vacation days traveling to DC where their office was, and eventually having an opportunity to visit the border of North Korea and China with their team. Up until then, I had seen every documentary and read every possible book, article, and report on North Korea that I could get a hold of. And believe me, in the early 2000s, there was not that much. But nothing could have prepared me for what it was going to be like to be on the ground. We arrived in the dead of winter, and it was freezing. No matter how many layers we had on under our snowboarding pants and our enormous puffy jackets, we could feel the chill in our bones. I thought about how North Korean refugees have to cross the Tumen River, which was just a few miles away from where we were. And they have to cross that river in order to escape out of North Korea. I was thinking about how cold they must be, trying to slide across the frozen ice, or having to wade through the freezing water if the river wasn't frozen yet. I could remember the image of a North Korean woman who was face down, frozen in the river. And I don't know if it was because she had drowned while she was trying to escape, or if it was because she had been shot in the back by a North Korean soldier while trying to escape. Our partner met us at the airport, and by meet, he signaled us from across the parking lot. And we followed him discreetly for a few blocks into a dark alleyway where we got into a van. We drove around for a while into the middle of nowhere. We transferred to another vehicle. And then when we finally arrived at a nondescript building, we quietly got out and went in. We were welcomed by the shrieks of a few children. We unpacked a bag full of thermal underwear and winter garments for the kids that were running around. And a few of our colleagues went off to go play with the children while the rest of us sat down with the caretaker who was in charge of that shelter. She provided us with updates on their budget, their activities, and some of the recent cases that they had. She nodded her head over at a little boy whom our staff was already very affectionately calling Stitch, like from Lilo and Stitch, because he had this adorable, scratchy voice. He was about 5 or 6, and he was having the time of his life running around in circles, chasing my colleague. You see, he wasn't allowed outside. He was confined to this shelter because of the risk of being caught. The woman looked over sadly at Stitch, and she told us, "I don't know what's going to happen to him." 2 days before, his parents had been caught by the Chinese police, who refused to recognize North Koreans as refugees. Instead, his parents would be forcibly sent back to North Korea, where they would be interrogated, possibly tortured, and punished for having escaped in the first place. It was unlikely that they were going to be able to try to escape again anytime soon, if ever at all. As we were leaving that night, Stitch gave all of us a big hug, and he made faces at us, trying to get us to laugh even until the very moments when we were walking out the door. But all I could think about was, he has no idea that he is probably never going to see his parents ever again. Returning back to the States a few weeks later was difficult. In my heart, I was so sad and I was so angry. I felt guilty about my own comfort, foolish about my previous plans. I thought about my grandmother who was from North Korea and how we never knew anything about her or her life. She never talked about it, but neither did our parents. Did I have family in North Korea? Could some of the refugees we had met be my relatives? Why was I fortunate enough that my grandmother left North Korea, my mom was born in South Korea, and then I got to be born in America? Why did I have so much privilege when someone like Stitch had the misfortune of being born on the wrong side of the border? Why did God put this overwhelming burden on my heart, and what was I supposed to do about it? These questions bothered me until I finally realized the opportunity that was before me. You see, we're often confined to learning about the depravity and the atrocities of history as just that, history. Things that have happened in the past. And as overwhelming as the North Korea issue was, and as small and insignificant and helpless as I felt, this was happening now. And before all of us was his invitation. It was the opportunity to do whatever we could to try to change the course of history and to help the North Korean people rewrite their own story. After that fateful night with my Hellmann's mayonnaise media plan, I made a new plan. I knew God had put this burden on my heart, and all that was left for me to do was to simply be obedient, no matter how much I doubted myself. I'll never forget the look on my father's face when I told him I was going to quit my advertising job to go work full-time for Liberty in North Korea. He was so proud of me, and he said that he would support me while I did this work. I'm just kidding. My dad's Korean. In another lifetime. He told me to wake up and go to law school if I really wanted to make a difference. For the first time ever, I knew he was truly disappointed in me. But more than that, he was probably just scared for me, that I was throwing everything away that I had worked so hard for. And to be honest, that dumb feeling of guilt also plagued me, because I couldn't stop thinking about the enormous sacrifices that my parents had made for me and my brothers to be able to see us succeed so that we didn't have to struggle the way they did as immigrants in this country. Deep down inside, I wanted so badly to succeed, to make my parents proud, to be able to take care of them for the rest of their lives as a way to appreciate everything that they had done for us. Because my father threw away his dream to be a judge in Korea and came here and opened up a laundromat so that we could have the American dream. I knew that I would get to be who I am because of who they could not be. But I knew I had to be true to my convictions, and that overrode the guilt. Fortunately, I didn't listen to him. I was convinced that the time to act was now. And it was. It was a time when North Korean refugees were flooding across the border into China. A time when mothers were so desperate that selling their own daughters to men in China was far better than to see them starve to death in North Korea. A time when very little was known about North Korea, and it seemed as if the international community just wasn't paying attention. It was the time to act. I took over the organization in 2008 when the founder left abruptly. There was no transition, no preparation, and no planning. All of those old insecurities came rushing back. How was I supposed to run this? And who did I think I was that I could actually do it? Suddenly, I felt too inexperienced. I was afraid that I lacked the knowledge, the leadership, and the vision that would be needed to carry things on. A.W. Tozer once said, "God is looking for people through whom he can do the impossible." What a pity we plan to do the things we can only do by ourselves. Fortunately, a good, swift kick in the butt by my now husband was exactly what I needed, to be reminded to stop thinking so much of myself and to just trust that God had me exactly where I was supposed to be, and that he would lay out the path before me just as he always had. I simply needed to be obedient and to pray continuously that his will be done and not mine. Despite having to work with limited resources, limited information, and sometimes limited skills, we started from where we were, because the lives of 25 million people mattered. And even though we lacked much and we faced a lot of obstacles, we knew that progress wasn't going to be based on our perfect knowledge or our perfect ability, but on obedience and on faith, no matter how crazy things seemed sometimes. It was a humbling reminder for us that we could only really believe in such a bold and audacious vision like the one we were chasing after because of a bold and audacious God whose heart broke even more than ours did for his people. A few years after taking over Link, I sat in a Starbucks in Seoul with a friend catching up. She was a researcher at a very prominent human rights organization at the time, and she was researching and interviewing the plight of North Korean women who were being trafficked in China at an alarming rate. I'll never forget sitting there in that Starbucks talking with her and listening to the stories of all of these women she had interviewed, the prices that they were sold at, their ages, young and old, the unimaginable circumstances they found themselves in, being coerced to work in brothels and online sex chat rooms, or being sold multiple times to different men. And sometimes being sold even by their own families. But there is one thing that she told me that really put me over the edge. The stories of some women who were being repeatedly exploited even after escaping China, even after being exploited in China. They were being exploited by people in Southeast Asia, pretending to pose as missionaries, who were taking these women to shelters, raping them, and taking their money. I was enraged, but rather than feeling helpless, this time I felt determined. That night, I sat in a bar with two of my colleagues, and we schemed together a plan that by ordinary measures should have seemed crazy and it should have been impossible. But we weren't dealing with an ordinary God. This plan would eventually become our refugee rescue program.
The phone rings. It's a tip from a trusted source. There's a North Korean refugee in China ready to make the dangerous journey to freedom. Our partners on the ground spring into action. Because Chinese authorities actively arrest and return refugees to North Korea, every hour counts. We make contact with the person, telling them to move to a rendezvous point in northeast China. From here, they'll join a group of other North Korean refugees, and together, they'll begin their escape. But what lies between this safe house and freedom is 3,000 miles of foreign country, dotted with security checkpoints, state-of-the-art Chinese surveillance, and the serious threat of being caught and forcibly sent back to the regime. The rescue route is like a modern-day underground railroad. At each leg of the journey, a new partner meets the group and guides them onward. The routes are always changing. A route that is safe one day might be too dangerous the next. The group constantly switches between trains, buses, cars, boats, and even walking on foot. They don't stop to eat. It's too dangerous to be in one place for too long. The most tense moment is usually at the southern Chinese border. If arrested here, it's undeniable to the regime that these refugees are defecting to South Korea, and the punishment that awaits them can be even more severe. But if they do make it across, they're just hours away from safety. Link's partner waits for the cover of darkness and moves the group close to the border. Darkness falls, and the refugees make their move. If everything goes well, they'll cross within minutes. The group safely crosses and the most pressing danger has passed. But even though they're out of the immediate reach of the Chinese authorities, the journey is far from over. Between them and their final destination is some of the world's most inhospitable jungle. The refugees trek through wilderness and climb miles of steep mountain terrain. After hours of mosquitoes, scorching heat, and suffocating humidity, the group emerges from the jungle. At a safe house in Southeast Asia, Link's field team is waiting for word on the group. A text message lights up the rescue phone, and the partner confirms what the team has been waiting to hear for days. They are safe and ready to make the final crossing into freedom. Link's field team is ready. They load up the rescue vehicle and race towards the pickup zone. The partner gives the group a cell phone to communicate with Link's field team until they can make contact at the pickup. The refugees describe what they see around them as the team tries to narrow in on their location. The rescue vehicle careens around a corner and the group is in the distance. The field team swings open the door and pulls everyone into the vehicle. It's likely a local has called the police to report seeing North Korean refugees. They must leave the area as quickly as possible. The group races away from the pickup zone and it starts to sink in. They are finally free for the first time in their lives. Some refugees are overwhelmed with emotion. The tears mix with the sweat and caked mud on their cheeks. Others are so exhausted they collapse into deep sleep. The group of refugees spend time with Link's field staff. They rest, eat, and then learn about the resettlement process, how long it'll take, what benefits they'll receive, and what challenges to expect. Finally, the group is ready to begin the last leg of their journey to South Korea or the United States. Before they leave, the field staff light candles on a cake and the whole group celebrates their newfound freedom. They have traveled the distance of New York to Los Angeles, avoiding authorities, trusting strangers, and moving towards the unknown. And while these refugees have reached freedom, there's another group in Northeast China just beginning.
Since beginning our rescue work, I'm so thankful that we have been able to help over 1,000 North Korean refugees reach freedom safely, and we've helped to reunite over 450 families. But doing this work also means facing a lot of challenges and risks. When a mission fails, the agony of knowing the fate that awaits North Korean refugees when they are caught and forced to return back to North Korea. The heavy burden of responsibility and the frustration that this situation even has to exist in the first place. The countless hands that we've held as mothers have told us unimaginable stories. One mother who tried to cross the river with her 4-year-old daughter, only to be dragged back to shore by North Korean soldiers and forced to watch the blood spilling out of her daughter's mouth as she was beaten in front of her. Or the mother, afraid for her own life, who was running away from the Chinese police as she hid in the mountains, covering her baby's mouth, afraid that his cries would reveal where they were hiding, only to discover 20 minutes later that she had accidentally suffocated her own baby. These are the unimaginable costs of freedom. But then there was the mother who was reunited with her son in freedom after 5 years of being separated. A young man who saw a cell phone for the first time ever when he was in China with us, and then a few years later was invited to come to the United States to participate in a coding boot camp program. And the young woman who began a new life in South Korea, and 10 years after escaping North Korea, she was opening up her own business. I share all of these stories with you not only because the North Korean people are some of the most resilient and incredible people I have ever met in my life, but because there is reason to have hope, even in the midst of so much darkness. And in those moments when my faith wavers, my hope diminishes, and I begin to feel overwhelmed, I close my eyes and I think about the audacious vision that God has put before me. It's a vision that is so vivid that it pushes me forward and reminds me that this brutal regime cannot and it will not last forever. Because there is a day that is coming when every North Korean man, woman, and child will live free and full lives. When students can choose what they want to study, when the North Korean people can freely travel the world, when teenagers can enjoy foreign music and movies without fear of punishment, when men's lives won't be based on loyalty to a ruthless regime, and women can speak freely for justice, and when the North Korean people have the freedom to have faith in something besides their leader. God has brought me this far because of one very radical vision. The North Korean people will achieve their liberty. It will be in our lifetime, And all of us have a role that we can play to help bring that day forward. I'd like to end by sharing this quote by John Piper. You don't have to know a lot of things for your life to make a lasting difference in the world. But you do have to know the few great things that matter, and then be willing to live and die for them. The people that make a durable difference in the world are not the people who have mastered many things, but have been mastered by a few great things. If you want your life to count, if you want the ripple effect of the pebbles you drop to become waves that reach the ends of the earth and roll on for centuries and into eternity, you don't have to have a high IQ or EQ. You don't have to have good looks or riches. You don't have to come from a fine family or a fine school. You have to know a few great, majestic, unchanging, obvious, simple, glorious things and be set on fire by them. Thank you.
So good, Hannah. Hey, before we let you go, Hannah, I just thought that we'd take advantage of a little time here and ask you a couple of questions. First of all, thank you for not throwing me under the bus. If anyone here has dirt on me, it's you, Jamba.
It's true.
So I appreciate that. No, but seriously, I mean, your story, your testimony, how God has led you is absolutely incredible. Can we just thank Hannah one more time? Absolutely incredible. And as I was sitting back there taking notes now for the second time, right, this being the second service, I just had to ask you on behalf of like the church here. I mean, we're a church, and if you look around, we're kind of like all over the spectrum. We have those that are a little bit older and wiser. Those of us, we're getting younger as a church. Sharing some stories last week about how like we have, a lot of people. I consider those 30 and under younger. Maybe that's because I'm that older. But anyways, we have a lot of younger folks, and I just, take us back to that time when we first met, and you were 20, and you were college students just coming to Jesus. You weren't like a Bible scholar. You were new in the faith. God gives you this vision, and particularly, I think many of us can resonate, like when you were talking about like your dad and how he's very proud of you now, but like back then, 17, 18, 19 years ago, and you're saying like this radical thing, this is where you want to go, like feeling that pressure. You talked about like obedience over confrontation, conviction over guilt. Talk to like that 20-something-year-old right now who has a radical dream, who has been given a gift, a fire, a vision from God, but maybe they just got baptized like last month. Maybe they just come into Christ right now. Maybe there are like so many, rules of engagement or Christian culture that like they have to kind of like wade through. Like talk to that person. What should that young lady, what should that young man kind of hold on to with this vision from God?
So I think it's a big question. There's a few parts there.
Yeah.
The first I will say, for any parents out there, for the kids, always listen to your parents. And for the kids, don't listen to your parents. No, I'm just kidding. I think that, I'm in the same position potentially as the person you just described. And, all I have to say is, I know I only shared very briefly, but if God could use a wretch like me, somebody that was so absolutely broken, and P-Tom can testify to that, and Erica as well, I think, again, we become our own worst enemy. We get in our own way so often. And one thing that I would really encourage is just don't be idle, because I think so often we're waiting for some sort of a huge sign from God. Like the clouds open and he says, here's where you should go, or here's the golden opportunity and here's what you need to do. But I think it was really more a matter of, going back to Proverbs 16:9, have plans, be active, do something, don't be idle. And then as you're doing these things, God is going to give you the steps. He's going to show you where you're supposed to be. And to be honest, we will never have it together. That's the whole point. And I think if you wait around for that, how many missed opportunities are we going to have, are you going to have to miss out on the blessing of being part of something incredible that God is doing? It's not us, it's God.
So good. So good. Yeah. Awesome. Hey, can we thank? So good. So good. Now I want you to speak to like those of us that are a little bit older. Like I kind of find myself like right in the middle. I can identify with a young college student, but I also as a not that funny. I can also identify, like, you know, having 3 kids of my own. 2 of them are teenagers now, right? Like, I can also identify with the with the older generation. And like when you shared about like how you're, like, I kind of got a lump in my throat when you were saying how your dad had these dreams of being a judge, and here he is. He moves to a foreign country, foreign language, foreign culture, new world perspective, and he owns a laundromat so that he can propel his children to live the dream. You said, I knew I could be who I am now because my parents were not who they wanted to be then. That is just a beautiful statement. That's so articulate. I knew I could be who I am now because my parents were not who they were then, or who they wanted to be then. Talk to the parent right now who's got that wild-eyed, crazy kid. Because right now, your dad is so proud of you, right? Like he loves what you're doing. But at that time, he's just like, what are you, crazy? No, you're gonna go to law school. You're gonna make something of yourself that way. Talk to the parent. What is your encouragement to the parent right now who has a wild-eyed, crazy college student or, you know, post-grad or high school student, and they know they're dealing with some fire here? What's some wisdom that you can impart upon them?
Yeah.
This is, by the way, totally impromptu. So
this is very
unstaged.
This is challenging, and I would say that, and I think a big part of the challenge for me that might be a little bit different is that because no one in my family is a believer, and my parents were not believers at the time. So that's what made it even more difficult. That's what made it seem so much more crazy. Because when I tried to explain to my dad that I was taking this leap of faith and I was doing something that seemed so crazy, but don't worry, I still have a plan, but it's still crazy. Right. He's like, well, how are you going to take care of yourself? And how are you going to do these things? And I said, Dad, you know, God's going to provide. I don't have to worry about it. And he says,
crazy.
And he looks at me and he goes, Hannah, come on. Come on. He says, you know, how are you going to provide for yourself? And so it was a back and forth, and I think it was really difficult. And I think that I hope it would be different for the parents who are here.
Because by virtue of any adult, any parent that's in here right now on church in Sunday, right, in a Sunday service, hopefully there would at least be the bond that you didn't have with your parents then. Hopefully we could see eye to eye in terms of Christ and God's call that way, huh?
Yeah.
So good.
I hope.
All right, I'll keep you off the hook.
Okay.
Hey, friends, can we just pray for Hannah right now and Link? Let's just pray. Father, I just thank you so much for Hannah. I thank you for John. I thank you for the Link team. I thank you that years ago, decades ago even, gosh, that feels old, but 17, 18 years ago, that you would light a fire in this young woman's heart, and that you would fan those flames, that this was not a man-made thing. This was not an experiment in just a fancy idea or a romantic idea. This was actually the touch of God. This was the burning bush that Moses saw. Something that was burning, that was from God, yet not consuming in a way that things disappear, but everlasting, Lord. That's what you've placed inside of Hannah, and I know that's what you've placed inside of many men and women here today, young and old. So I pray, Father, what is from you, the fire that is from you, that would continue to burn in all of us. And may we gather encouragement today, 17, 18 years later, being on this side of that vision, saying, oh God, you are so faithful. God, you are so good, and we thank you for it. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Let's give Hannah one more round of applause. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you so much for checking out this video. If you enjoyed it, would you give us a like? Also, would you hit the subscribe and the notification buttons? And then you'll be notified about all future content that we post here. Also, if you want to get involved with our community, please fill out a Connect card and one of our pastors will be sure to follow up with you. Thank you so much for checking out this channel. God bless you.